I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, who are the original custodians of the land on which I'm broadcasting from. And I'd like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians present today as well. And for those joining from elsewhere in Australia, I'd also like to extend the acknowledgement to all First Australians, wherever the land is that you're on today as well. So a brief introduction of myself. My name's Theo. I'm a PhD student at the University of Melbourne studying the deepening of clean energy collaboration between Australia and South Korea. So this topic is obviously of interest to me. And I'd like to now hand over to my supervisor and the director of the Korean Studies Research Hub at the University of Melbourne, Associate Professor Jae Song, who's just going to give a brief introduction as well.
Thank you so much, Theo, for organizing this wonderful seminar. And good evening, everyone. My name is Jae Song. I'm a director of Korean Studies Research Hub and also Korean Studies at the Asia Institute of the University of Melbourne. It's my great pleasure to have to invite and have Dr. Chiew for our Korean Studies seminar series today. She's a senior lecturer in strategic studies and international relations at the National University of Malaysia. As you can see, it's very rare to have a fellow female academic in strategic studies, especially in politics and international relations. So you'll probably see her in every conference on international security or the South Korea foreign relations. She's very famous in this region. And also she got a PhD from our neighboring university, La Trobe University in Australia, in politics and international relations. So she's not new to a Melbourneian in that sense. She's also the editor of the New Southern Policy, which is very close to today's topic, and another forthcoming book, volume on Southeast Asia DPRK relation, which is another really fascinating topic. So maybe we should invite her again for that topic for the next Korean Studies seminar series. She's been working on East Asian international relations over 14 years of teaching at her university, the National University of Malaysia, and regional policy consultation. And she's also deeply engaged with a think tank network and activities, including International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS in Singapore, where I actually met her in one of those Shangri-La dialogues in the past. So it's really great to have her for today's seminar. I'll just hand over the screen to Chiew. The screen is all yours.
Thanks so much, Professor Jae Song, and also Theo for this wonderful organization of the Korean Studies Seminar. I'm Chiew from Malaysia, and it's really nice to be able to address this topic to the Melbourne audience and also from elsewhere. So I really miss Melbourne. I haven't been back since 2016, so I really look forward to the next in-person meeting. And today, I'm going to talk about middle powers in the Indo Pacific. One of our common friends, Dr. Jeffrey Robertson, so he may disagree that we should use this middle power moniker on anything on foreign policy, on regional architecture and strategy. But I think there is still some worthwhile exploration to be done in terms of how to institutionalize regional cooperation, for example. So without further ado, allow me to just provide an overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to focus on the bilateral-multilateral nexus in the Korea-ASEAN-Australia partnership. So the concept of middle power, I will just go through some of them very quickly. And both Australia and South Korea are known as traditional and new middle powers, and how their bilateral relationship can actually fit in via ASEAN as the moderator of this multilateral bilateral nexus. So since the very late 16th century, the concept of middle power has been explored as a form of power that has sufficient strength and authority and without much need of help from others. And eventually, after the post-war era, so people start to look at the size of the countries, their material sources, ability to accept responsibility. So often, more than not, middle powers are known as the responsible powers. And of course, there were waves of literatures on middle power. So the first wave deal with how carving alongside the post-war strategic scenario where Western nations, especially trying to carve out their new positions, and in which we saw Canada, a North American power that seems to be responsible enough to advocate a sense of moral and principle-based diplomacy that hinge on multilateralism, human rights, and came along with Australia that's also enhanced in their material and also influence in terms of their power. Then they were collectively known as the middle powers that advocate for the types of value that is most familiar to the Western audience especially. So the second wave came amidst the post-Cold War period, where a group of middle powers, some just freshly independent, formidable in size, and they become playing a more and more important entrepreneurial or commercial roles in international system. That also coincides with the third wave of globalizations, industrializations. So we see countries like South Korea, South Africa, including our neighboring country, Indonesia, emerged on the global stage as G20 or the emerging industrial power of the world. So the financial crisis in 2008 also further defined beyond the material capability of the middle powers. So we do see different forms of grouping, a kind of a middle power coalition. So outside of G20, we also have BRICS, MICTA, so which also include countries like Australia, South Korea, China, Indonesia, South Africa, among the different groupings. So I would like to highlight one of the pessimism against the concept of middle power in terms of how much autonomy and agency they actually yielded in today's world. So Professor Paul Evans from University of British Columbia, in his 2016 publication, defined middle powers principle or inclusive multilateralism are increasingly being eclipsed by the great power leadership, not only in the form of multilateral trade agreements like TPP or RCEP, but also in comparison to the other forms of coalition, especially US-based alliances. Those seems to have stronger gravitational pull, such as US NATO in Europe, Northern Atlantic, and also US Japan, US Korea, US Australia, and even US Thailand and US Philippines in the Asia Pacific regions. So a lot of security tensions that arise, and they often also eclipse the type of the multilateralism diplomacy that the middle powers are trying to assert. So are we going to break the middle power mold in the way that their importance can be proven by the utility, pragmatism, and rather than by the tensions and the all too familiar balance of power? So comparing Australia and South Korea's middle power, and right now we are entering the new era defined by the Indo Pacific. In terms of categorization, Australia falls under the category of a traditional middle power. As for South Korea, it's more economic driven, a bigger economic power by now. This year, it is now the top 10 biggest economy in the world. So both also share similarities in terms of their interconnectedness with the great power like the United States and China. So both are former US ally, and also China are their top main trading partner. In terms of Indo-Pacific vision, we saw we can observe that Australia has greater security-oriented strategy with the new Albanese government. We do see more venture into multilateralism element, even though with the newly minted AUKUS and its related development, it is still difficult to see Australia distancing away from the security-oriented Indo-Pacific vision. As for South Korea, they have been very much economy-oriented, non-confrontational, but with the new Yoon Suk-yeol government, perhaps they are now moving towards a closer alignment with the United States, and we don't know whether they would open new confrontational frontier with China, North Korea, and some other countries that may deem such shifting in alignment as a threat. So in terms of strategic posture, they are now closely aligning with the Indo-Pacific, and if not mistaken, South Korea is going to release their Indo-Pacific tilt kind of strategy statement, maybe before the end of this year. And in terms of their capacity to implement or to exercise their middle powers, so Australia have more layers of strategic alliances and alignments, including Quad and the AUKUS. As for South Korea, whether they are going to be formalized as part of Quad Plus, and how significant would be their Indo-Pacific tilt is yet to be seen. So as for the Australia-South Korea bilateral relations, I really enjoyed some of the commentaries written by our friends again, Jeffrey Robertson, about how significant these two middle powers are in this region, but yet they are not very close to each other in terms of their exchanges and also coordination. So I would like to quote one thing that Jeffrey mentioned, that is, economically, there is no problem at all. They are highly complementary to each other. But in terms of domestic political exchanges, it may seem a little bit irrelevant to each other. So how can we add actions to this set of seemingly rhetoric middle power strategic partnership? So, I think there is also a sense of questions when this topic was proposed. Is ASEAN a middle power? So ASEAN is undeniably an institutional multilateralism platform. It is consensus-based, and due to that consensus, whether it is the much criticized ASEAN centrality or the ASEAN-based platform that is more like a talk shop rather than action-based arrangements. However, it is undeniable that as a grouping, they managed to bring most of the major powers. So one of the major contributions of a regional institution like ASEAN is their role as a major power binding mechanism. And I would like to highlight that in the later section of my presentation. So as for Australia-ASEAN partnership, the partnership has been formed since the 70s. So well before South Korea, China, and Japan in terms of ASEAN +3 partnership. So this was also the time when Australia has to navigate some very careful sets of relations, especially with Indonesia, later in the 2000s with Timor-Leste. So the relationship have gone through many rounds of security challenges, especially in terms of the wider strategic change in the region, East Asia, Asia-Pacific, and now Indo-Pacific. So the bilateral trade between Australia and ASEAN has become so great. It was greater than the two-way trade with Japan and US now. And many people doesn't realize this, but the ASEAN often being rendered to just as a body of market rather than an institution that has its strategic values. So due to this investment-based partnership, So now Australia is investing more with its partnership with ASEAN to the extent that they are now being upgraded to comprehensive strategic partnership as well. So these are just some of the major figures in terms of import and export between Australia and ASEAN as a grouping. And you can see that as a production manufacturing region, ASEAN provides a lot of such goods that is much needed by Australia, and also because of the proximity of the 10 countries with Australia. So this kind of arrangement and also pattern is only logic and acceptable. So as for the many programs that Australia has supported for a very, very long time, so there is also a sense of economic community building, social culture, and also despite the misperception sometimes between different sets of leaders, political security is also very well constructed. So especially in terms of non-traditional security cooperation, the cultivation of security cooperation in that area has been building well over many decades. So under the latest comprehensive strategic partnership framework, so new conventions including implementation project on against trafficking in persons, especially women and children, for example, human rights, counter trafficking, and also political security partnership. So all of this only mean that Australia-ASEAN relations are only going to deepen further rather than scale back. As for the comprehensive strategic partnership, there is actually Australia for ASEAN initiatives. So many of these are actually existing initiatives that has been launched, and many of my friends will actually benefits from all those such as scholarships, Future Skills Initiative. TVET is a very big area of collaboration between ASEAN and Australia. And now there is more support in terms of the mutual outlook on the Indo Pacific. So how about Korea and Australia? So we see that, so this is Australian ambassador to South Korea, Catherine Ratter. So there is this first Korea-Australia Future Forum that was just take place a few months ago in Seoul. In contrast, Korea-ASEAN Forum has long been launched since, especially after the Asian financial crisis. So a lot of attention has been paid to ASEAN as a region by South Korean government since the Kim Dae-jung administration. So in this regard, I think Korea-Australia has a lot of catch up to do, but I think the progress would be very much in terms of rapidness, would be able to catch up to the progress of what Korea-ASEAN has already been built. So in terms of ROK-ASEAN partnership, the full dialogue partner status has been institutionalized since 1991, but the Korea-ASEAN Forum has started since 1989. So this is also the reason why ASEAN has very quick emerged as one of the partner region for South Korea when it comes to financial crisis and also in terms of market trade. So the trade volume was so high, it replaced China over 2018 and 2019. So, and there are many, numerous to name the initiatives. So I would just show this slide. And so this is coming from the ASEAN Korea Center. As for the dialogue mechanism, there are multiple layered. So these are the government-to-government mechanism, and there were actually many non-government mechanism that is across the multilateral platform with ASEAN and also the bilateral ones with each of the ASEAN member countries. So another figure from the ASEAN Secretariat itself. So highlighting here is South Korea and Australia as the study of the case study of today's talk. So China remained the top partner, followed by US, EU, Japan, and now South Korea is one of the top 5, followed by India and then Australia. So we can see that a lot of this would only mean that the partnership can only make sense from now on, especially in the post-pandemic era. So what does the bilateral multilateral nexus mean for Korea, ASEAN, and Australia? So as I mentioned just now, there are ASEAN plus bilateral mechanisms such as ASEAN-ROK and ASEAN-Australia. In terms of ASEAN's middle power multilateralism, they play a role of bridging, coalition coordinating, non-diffusing. So even though there is some awkward response, for example, from Indonesia and Malaysia towards AUKUS, however, once understanding has been established, so we have to give thanks to Australian public diplomacy, the misunderstanding was quickly diffused, and both Indonesia and Malaysia quickly voiced their support for AUKUS strategic partnership. So the type of network of the existing and potential bilateral and multilateral linkages via the ASEAN platform is numerous, and they can be used for good in terms of the Indo Pacific connectivity, combining South Korea, ASEAN, and Australia. So another great platform like ASEAN Regional Forum, the membership includes also not only South Korea and also Australia, but also Quad members, EU, US, China, and also the so-called the problematic rock states like DPRK and Myanmar right now. So we will see how ASEAN would deal with Myanmar next year, since progress is difficult to reach within this year. So in terms of the opportunities and challenges, I think there are 3 major conundrums that South Korea, ASEAN, and Australia have to face together. One is the US-China power competition, and the multiple chessboards here refer to the geopolitical chessboard, geoeconomic chessboard with decoupling and diverging supply chain be possible. And another area is the geostrategic chessboard in South China Sea, Korean Peninsula, Taiwan Straits, and many more. So the second, the North Korean conundrum, I think not only it is about the nuclear and missile provocation and also how we should deal with the North Korean human rights situation. And we know that when we raise these topics with the North Korean counterpart, they would refuse to engage. So how should we go about that? And I think there is some lessons that can be imparted from how Southeast Asian countries deal with North Korea bilaterally. So in terms of collective dialogue with North Korea, it is almost impossible outside of the 6-party talks framework. But without major stakeholders, I think that is actually another approach that we haven't tried with North Korea. So thirdly is the economic security hedging. Lots of the countries in the Indo Pacific has very close security partnership with the United States, while having China as their top trade partner. So by combining them in the form of economic security hedging, they will not be at odds with each other, but actually would bring mutual benefits while trying to mitigate the risk that may come from the US-China power competition. So what the bilateral, multilateral nexus can or cannot work for Korea, ASEAN, and Australia. So that would be the different risk assessment by the 3 actors. On the other hand, there can also be converging opportunities and interests that they would want to work together. For example, on cybersecurity, energy security, among others. Secondly, would be the shifting domestic leadership that is always a problem, no matter where we go. However, if each of the government can come up with the long-term statecraft, and for ASEAN, a long-term Indo-Pacific vision as the policy guideline for ASEAN member states, then a long-term partnership via bilateral multilateral nexus will be possible. Last but not least, we need to have a more institutionalized response to disruptions. For example, global pandemic, North Korean nuclear provocations, the unexpected Russian-Ukraine war, and the shifting alignments among the Indo Pacific partners itself, like Australia, United Kingdom, and also the United States. So aside from these slides that I'm trying to show, just very briefly before we go to the Q&A. So I just want to show one more possibility of the convergence of interest that can be studied between South Korea, ASEAN, and Australia is in the form of what I have done for the new Southern policy between South Korea and ASEAN. So for example, the 4 selected ASEAN member states like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, because New Southern policy and ASEAN have the corresponding economic prosperity, social, cultural, people to people, and also political security peace pillar. So by reviewing what are the key anchoring niche between the both sides, for example, 4 countries and ASEAN have joined R&D with South Korea, and there is a cross-border e-commerce going on, next generation automobile with all member states. And in terms of the bilateral nexus, there would be infrastructure connectivity development depend on the national niche. For example, for Indonesia, it would be water supply, for Malaysia, water management, for Singapore, small city projects in the third world country, and for Thailand, the railway corridor across the East-West line or their East-West corridor. So other national prioritized projects, including maritime fulcrum of Malaysia, of Indonesia, Look East policy of Malaysia, artificial intelligence by Singapore, and Thailand's robotic and future cars initiative. So in terms of education, capacity building, people to people, and also in terms of peace pillar, middle power diplomacy. So everything is already there. So it's just up to the interested nations to work on how to realize those bilateral, multilateral potentials. So thereby, I ended my presentation, and I look forward to the question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chuping. That was amazing. So interesting. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we're going to move into the Q&A.